Welcome to the module on building ASP.NET MVC apps with the Microsoft Graph .NET SDK. In this module, you're going to learn how to work with the Microsoft Graph .NET SDK to create an ASP.NET MVC Web Application that's going to access data in Microsoft 365. Hi, I'm Andrew Connell. I'm a Microsoft MVP in the area of Microsoft 365 development. I have a lot of experience with SharePoint development, Microsoft Graph, Microsoft Teams, developing add-ins for Microsoft Office, as well as developing applications for Microsoft Identity, including Azure Active Directory. This video is the first in a series of videos on this Microsoft Learning module. This video is also part of a playlist that includes all the videos that are associated with this module so you can watch them in order. The playlist and all its included videos are associated with a Microsoft Learning module that includes hands-on lab exercises and additional resources. Check the notes for this video and the associated playlist for more information and where to find the Microsoft Learning module. Okay, let's get started. In this module, you're going to learn how to work with the Microsoft Graph .NET SDK to create an ASP.NET MVC Web Application that's going to access data in Microsoft 365. We're going to start with an introduction to the Microsoft Graph API, and then we're going to demonstrate how to work with SDKs, code samples, and different resources. The Microsoft 365 developer vision focuses on the user experience and their data. And as a developer, you can bring your application into the user experience with over 1.2 billion users of Office worldwide. This is a huge opportunity to provide a window into your application to connect their data to your application. There are currently over 850 million events created each month and a total of over 400 petabytes of data stored in the service that can add value to your users. The Microsoft Graph is the gateway to your data in the Microsoft Cloud, as you can see. The Microsoft Cloud includes multiple services and data types that we can take advantage of from Office 365, and it's all considered part of the Microsoft 365 platform. Developers can integrate the signed-in user's email, calendar, contacts, and tasks into custom apps. We can work with content in SharePoint lists, and files, and document libraries, and in OneDrive, channels and content within Microsoft Teams, and users within Azure Active Directory. There are many different services that developers can take advantage of in their custom apps. Many of these services have their own APIs that developers can interact with. However, this can be challenging to go to each of these individual services with their individual endpoints. Each API may have its own permission model, which means that they can have individual access control configurations. Different endpoints for each service mean our custom application will need to obtain an access token from Azure AD for each of the different endpoints. One of the benefits of Microsoft Graph is that it serves as a proxy endpoint to all of these other services. Microsoft Graph encompasses things such as Office 365, Windows 10, Enterprise Mobility, and Security, and it brings all of these different services under one unified endpoint, graph.microsoft.com. The advantage to using Microsoft Graph is that it allows developers to have just a single endpoint, a resource, which means you're only going to need a single access token to authenticate the different services. Each service still has its own individual permissions so that everything is still secured in an individual way. A single endpoint makes it easier for developers to build applications. Microsoft Graph also enables easy navigation of entities and the relationships between these entities. And while there are many different Microsoft 365 services, such as OneDrive for Business or Outlook for contacts and calendars, these different entities are related to each other. And these relationships are in the Microsoft Graph, which makes it easy to navigate from one entity to another, even if it's across different underlying endpoints. Microsoft Graph supports two options to authenticate. One option is with Azure Active Directory only, or a work and school account. And the other option is converged auth, which means that you can either use Azure AD or a Microsoft account. And in this case, you can use the exact same code in the Microsoft Graph, the same endpoints and the same SDK to get my files, either if they're in OneDrive Consumer or in OneDrive for Business. And the same is true for calendar, contacts, and email in Outlook.com or in Office 365. And the nice thing about this is that the data that you fetch is all dependent on the login of the user that signed in. So you don't have to write special code or use different APIs or endpoints to get the data for consumer accounts or for business accounts. As previously stated, Microsoft Graph supports both Microsoft accounts and Azure AD accounts, also referred to as work and school accounts. Nothing in Microsoft Graph's APIs or SDKs is unique to the sign-in process. The code is the same, and the sign-in determines which services in Microsoft Graph will access. If the user is signed in with a Microsoft account, the Files endpoint maps to the OneDrive Consumer endpoint, and while the Work and School sign-ins map to OneDrive for Business. This is just but one example. To determine which account type your app supports, or if it supports both, you set a specific setting in the associated Azure AD app in the Azure AD Admin Center. Now let's look at what's involved in creating an ASP.NET web app that's been configured with MSAL and OWYN middleware for authentication with Azure AD. Developers can use Microsoft Graph in many different types of applications. So in this module, I'm adding support for calling Microsoft Graph to display events from a currently user's signed-in calendar in an ASP.NET MVC Web Application. Step 1 is going to be to create an ASP.NET MVC Web App using Visual Studio Project's Creation Wizard. And then I'm going to add and configure the Microsoft Authentication Library, MSAL, for .NET, and the OWYN middleware. This enables the web applications to allow users to sign in and to obtain access tokens from Azure AD to use when submitting requests for Microsoft Graph. These two libraries will require that you install a few libraries in your project. The libraries are available as NuGet packages. Next, I'm going to ensure their application is using SSL. When you register an application with Azure AD, you're going to need to specify the redirect URL where users will be sent to after a successful sign-in. This URL must be configured. Now, all the extra stuff that you need in order to set this up is all distributed using NuGet packages. And as I mentioned, the Microsoft Authentication Library and the OWYN middleware are all distributed as NuGet packages. So these are the packages that we're going to install in our project. The OWYN Host System Web, OWYN Security OpenID, and the OWYN Security.Cookies packages. Those are all going to be to implement our OWYN middleware. And then the next two are for the identity.client. That is for the Microsoft Authentication Library. And then the last one is for the .NET SDK for Microsoft Graph.